Welcome, dear listeners. I'm Nyx, curator of this penny dreadful moment. And tonight, I have a very special surprise for you all. This collection is all about the ladies. So sit back and enjoy this little tale of the ultimate predator, the seductress, Lilith.
I know what I am. I know what I have always been since the beginning of my existence. I'm a being of lust and nothing else. This is how I live. This is my purpose. You probably wouldn't know me from the next girl you see, though aside from one little detail. You're probably just like the rest of them. You'll turn your head and double take. Your eyes will scan over every curve, and if you're like a good number of those who have found themselves alone with me, you just might salivate. Each luscious curve makes your mouth water, and then you just know one thing. You have to have me. I look like the perfect lover, don't I? This is just what I was meant to be, darling. I was meant to be everything you want. That doesn't mean that you are what I want, though. There are all sorts of people in this big world, and I've come to realize I've had a little taste of every kind. Male, female, and even a few that fall under the categories of both or neither. The myths aren't all true. You won't so much die from such intimate contact with me, though, well, not instantly. You will grow ill, be it mentally or physically. As for your soul, that's already mine. Once you spill forth those empty words to get what you want. I love you, they say. Ah, yes, that's what they all say. That's what they tell me, just so I give them my love. I suppose these confused little sheep view love and sex as the same thing. It's too cute. Do they think I truly feel such an emotion? Of course they think so. They don't know what I am. They fail to realize I don't speak such words in return. I may be a demon, but of all things I am, I'm certainly not a liar. I don't love. I hunger. Words of adoration are scattered about for me to select as I choose. Soon, though, soon, I know I'll most likely be left behind in favor of a warmer lover. Most likely one more like themselves. Yes, I cry. I cry in hopes that my lover will feel pity for me, so that I can keep draining away their health. So I can watch them slowly crumble and deteriorate into something less than human. But even if you do manage to escape my grasp, that one little essential part you gave up when you told me your silly promises won't come back to you. Yes, go ahead. Adore your spouse. Shower them with all the affection that were once mine. I watch from a distance. I watch you grow old and gray. I watch you grow frail and sickly. I watch as your mind slowly begins to deteriorate and you go tumbling into a state of wild insanity. And I laugh. You're so replaceable, so disposable. Do you think I'd ever tell you my real name? Lilith. I've put that one out of use millennia ago. I could be anyone. Amanda, Rebecca, Stephanie, or that sweet girl you know at the cafe. Just know that I, and of course, others I made like me, happen to be everywhere. Oh, and ladies, and in particular gentlemen, don't feel so safe. I made males like myself as well, and I'm sure they're just dying to meet you. It truly isn't our fault though. We're meant to be irresistible, to draw in the weak-willed, and to fulfill the desperate fantasies of the mortal. It's so funny, isn't it? It's just so cute that a little extra piece of ass on the side could cost someone their soul and well-being. Now, you'll just have to excuse me for being nosy, but when is the last time you told someone you love them?
Makes you think twice about that last hookup, where you, oh so drunkenly, professed your undying love. If they were out of your league, well, let's just hope you don't pay for it later. This next tale should make you think twice about the joys of motherhood. Incubators.
I was a nurse fresh out of my program and eager to start working. After applying to many different hospitals, I was accepted by a prestigious private hospital specializing in obstetrics and prenatal care. The hospital was famous for its surrogacy program and had global reputation of delivering the healthiest and genetically superior babies. I was, of course, excited and couldn't wait to see my new hospital and meet my new coworkers. I arrived at the famous Blessed Wing Hospital at 9 a.m. sharp. I was greeted by several upbeat and cheery nurses and doctors, and my attending was just as wonderful. It didn't take long for me to make friends and fit right in with the routine. I was, of course, restricted from full access to the hospital, seeing as I was new and needed to earn my privileges. The only thing that struck me as odd was the fact that I never saw any patients coming into the hospital or leaving. What I did see were very many happy couples arriving to adopt their newborns. I never saw the surrogates before or even after delivery. My job was to tend to the many newborns and ensure that each baby was taken home by their proper parents. It was a very fulfilling job to work with such small, innocent bundles of joy. Each baby was perfectly healthy and no two babies looked alike. It was as if each baby had been custom designed before birth. I only had one problem with working in the hospital. When I was outside the nursery and waiting room, I could hear loud, painful screams of the women in labor. The doctors and nurses did their best to ease the delivering women, but the screams continued. Stranger still, the screams seemed less and less like screams of pain and more like screams of terror. I had learned to tune out the screams and focus on the miracle that followed. That is, until I heard one of the women scream something I will never forget. "Why do you keep doing this to me? Please! I want to leave!" After a few months of working, I felt confident enough to start asking about the oddly absent patients. My questions were met with silence and stern looks from both the doctors and nurses. Finally, my attending pulled me aside and told me to stop asking questions and just do my job. There was nothing to worry about. The screams of pain and terror continued to ring out through the hallways of the hospital. I found solace in the nursery where I could tend to the newborns, but the screams would always follow me as I walked through the halls. My first year passed with no incident, and I was no longer on restricted access. I could freely roam through the entire hospital. There was no reason for me to wander beyond the nursery or the doctor's lounge. My curiosity, however, got the better of me. Shortly after my 1-year anniversary, I was wandering the halls when I heard the screaming of another woman in labor. But what caught my attention was that this was the same woman I heard pleading with the doctors shortly after I started working. She was delivering a second baby in less than 2 years. This was very risky, and as a professional surrogate, she would know better than to do this. Again, I heard her screaming in fear and begging the doctors to let her go. I didn't understand. Let her go? Was she being hospitalized against her will? I waited 2 more weeks before I finally had the nerve to check out the back rooms of the hospital. I was on the night shift, and with little activity, it was easy for me to slip by unnoticed. I found myself walking down a long hallway and signs pointing in the direction of the numerous delivery rooms as well as a second doctor's lounge. It was then I heard a woman cry out in pain. I had come to recognize that cry of pain as a woman deep in labor. The odd thing was that her cry came from behind a door labeled Incubators. I didn't see anyone else in the maternity wing or exiting the delivery rooms, so I went into the room to check in on her. I wish I hadn't. When I opened the door, what I saw sent a wave of nausea that I can still taste to this day. The large room had 24 beds, each bed holding a woman in different stages of pregnancies. The women were all young, of various races, and each woman had both of their arms and both of their legs amputated. The women were helpless and alone. Tubes and IVs containing nutrients and fluids snaked across the women's mutilated bodies as the only means to keep them alive. One blonde woman, her belly absolutely massive in comparison to her mangled body, spotted me and begged me to help her. "Please, you have to help get us out of here!" I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I just stared at them with my hand over my mouth. "Please," she cried out again. "They won't let us leave. They keep using us, using our bodies." I backed away from the sight toward the door. The woman cried out to me, tears in her eyes. "We can't move. We can't escape. Please, you have to help us." Fear set in and I bolted from the room. I returned to the nursery of the hospital and stared with fascination at the innocent newborns that laid before me. This couldn't be the result of such a horrific experiment, could it? My shift came to an end. I couldn't get out of the hospital fast enough. As soon as I pulled into the front driveway, I threw up on the grass and began weeping for the poor women I had abandoned. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the cries of pain and the pleading for their freedom. 2 days later, I returned to the hospital and began my shift. I walked into the nursery, and my eye was immediately drawn to a newborn with blonde hair. The same hair of the woman who had begged for my help. And I knew what I saw was true. I lied to my attending and said I was going home early because I was feeling ill. As soon as I was in the safety of my home, I called the police and told them what I had seen. The police arrived at the hospital and found the same gruesome sight that I had found. The women were taken to a new hospital, and my hospital has been shut down. I breathed a sigh of relief and waited for the story to break on the news. But no story aired. There was no mention of the human incubators that had been freed from the hospital. In fact, there was no record of the women arriving at the new hospital for proper care.
Well, looks like our nurse was no Florence Nightingale. You can't save everyone. Am I right? Oh, it looks like some of you are curious about the afterlife. Well, how about a trip to a psychic reader? The mother-daughter thing.
It's crazy, these so-called psychics who communicate with the dead. I've always considered them as wannabe failed actors who also had a knack for reading verbal and nonverbal cues of the oblivious public. Kind of like poker players who read other players' mannerisms and reactions in order to gain advantage. There was absolutely no way in hell she could have known. It had been my deepest shame and secret for the past 2 years, and I had not breathed a word. I remember the very moment it first started. I was 20 and was close to hitting rock bottom after spiraling into a deep abyss of depression, drugs, and sex. I was in the shower after crawling home from some guy's house, whose name I don't remember now, or, to be completely honest, even that morning. Trying to desperately feel clean, inside and out I assume, I literally froze in mid-scrub as I heard some rustling noises just outside my bathroom door. I was home alone as my housemate had gone away for the weekend, so, naturally, unexpected noises startled me. I listened out for a few seconds before dismissing it to a combination of the running shower and possibly the come down from a cocktail of uppers I had consumed. But no, there it was again. This time, I turned the faucets off, desperately straining my ears to confirm the reality of the sounds outside my door, all whilst trying to blink away soap suds that were dripping into my eyes. At first, nothing, but then I heard the familiar squeak of my doorknob being turned, followed by a gust of cool air that flowed into my steamed-up bathroom. The suds were really foaming up, and the more I tried to rub them aside, the more it stung my eyes. My other hand was busy, furiously trying to defog my steamed-up shower cubicle, so I could see what the hell was going on. Ugh. It had gotten too much, and I had to quickly blast cold water to rinse myself off, and the soap from burning my eyes. When I turned off the water and flung open my shower door, I was greeted with, well, nothing, as one should expect. The bathroom door was shut, and no strange rustling outside my door. Although the voice inside my head persisted that I had felt the cool change of air and heard the squeaky door handle turn. My desperation to convince myself that somehow I had just imagined it all was more comforting. But that wasn't before I felt the slightest brush against my thighs. It was just the softest, lightest sensation for a split second, but definitely something. Blaming the come down and lack of sleep, I had gone about everything else afterwards like I usually would have. The next time I questioned my sanity was, awkwardly enough, whilst in the middle of, well, you know, pinned up against some guy's headboard in an unnatural angle, legs over his shoulders, and wondering if he knew of the mold stains in the right corner of his bedroom ceiling. It had been a good 6 months since the shower incident. Something moved in the corner of my eye, and I had thrown the guy off me in shock, exclaiming, "Who the hell is that?" The poor bloke looked so confused as he looked behind his shoulder before telling me he lived alone. "But I saw someone, or thing." My voice had faltered as "this chick is a nutcase" expression came over his face. I'd shook my head and mustered up my sexiest, most dazzling smile that I could at the time, before jumping onto his lap, straddling him. A cool, feathery stroke brushed against my thighs, which caused me to shiver and smile at him, before realizing both his arms were wrapped around my waist. These little jerky movements became increasingly frequent, as well as the gentle feeling of something touching my leg. I guess I thought if I ignored it, it didn't happen. So, after seeing flickers of movement twice in an hour after a binge session for my 21st birthday, I decided to call it a night and was laying in bed, groggily reminiscing the blurry memories of the past 3 days, waiting for the Sandman to come. Then came a creak from the foot of my bed. I had wooden floorboards, so they naturally made painstaking noises when walked upon, but obviously that was not supposed to be part of the plan when alone in your room at 2 a.m. in the morning trying to catch some Z's. I made a beeline for my lamp switch, and my room was filled with the warm glow of my childhood Tigger nightlight. Of course, nothing was there. I let out the breath I didn't even realize I was holding and leaned over to switch off Tigger when I felt a slight weight on the foot of my bed. I whirled around to see, but nothing. What the fuck? I did not care if I was the big 2-1. I was going to sleep with my goddamn nightlight on. I lay back down slowly and pulled my covers up. There it was again, this time right near my feet. I inhaled sharply as I felt the pressure slowly come up next to my knee. It was like there was someone, or something, slowly crawling up my bed. Except, of course, there had been nothing there when I had first checked, and now I refused to look again. The weight slowly shifted up to where my thighs were, and that's when I managed to find my voice. Who's there? I wanted to sound confident, but my voice had come out shaky and about 3 octaves higher than normal. In hindsight, I knew I would have been more scared if I heard a reply, so it was a pretty dumb thing to have said out loud. But back then, my brain was obviously much more focused on other matters on hand to have realized this. I felt another tread, this time near where my stomach was. Whatever it was getting damn close. I wanted to scream, but it seemed to be caught in my throat. The next step came, and this time, it came with a sudden chill of an icy breeze. Goosebumps exploded across my skin even though it was under the blanket. I felt like the room temperature had suddenly plummeted to just above freezing as I felt the cold burst of air on my face. That's when I heard it. Her. "Mommy?" It was the faintest voice of a little girl. It sounded so far away, yet I heard her loud and clear as if she were right next to, oh, Jesus, Mary, Mother effing Christ. That gave me the strength I needed to let out the most piercing scream I had ever expelled in my life. My housemate Anna burst into my room armed with a baseball bat. She placed it down next to her when she realized I was alone with my Tigger nightlight in the fetal position under my covers. "Kristen, are you okay? Are you overdosing? Should I call an ambulance?" "No," I whimpered from underneath my shield of cloth. "What's wrong?" she asked and sat down on the foot of my bed. I jumped at the sudden weight again. She looked at me concerned. "Kay, what's going on?" Ugh, she was going to think I was a goddamn nutcase. Hell, maybe I was. I explained to her what had been happening. The shower incident, the movements in the corner of my eyes, the brushes on my thighs, and summed it up by what had just happened tonight. To my surprise, she didn't suggest a padded room with a straitjacket. She just looked thoughtful before suggesting I go with her somewhere later today, as it may shine some light on my situation. Mystified, I agreed, but only if she would spend the night in my room. Thank God. I'd have followed her happily to the madhouse to have her with me tonight. So, there we were, standing in this random lady's chambers, which was really a makeshift basement, flooded with candles, stones, charms, and other bits and pieces I did not wish to look closer to make out. I glared at Anna, who was doing a great job of pretending she didn't notice my, "What the hell are we doing here? I was wrong. You're the one who needs to be institutionalized," dirty looks I was sending her. The place she had taken me to was some whack job lady calling herself Lady Purgatory, the voices for the dead and living. Her receptionist had ushered us into this elaborately adorned basement and told us solemnly that Lady P would grace us shortly. That was 20 minutes ago. Talk about making an entrance. She better not be charging by the hour. I ignored the flicker of darting movement from the corner of my eye as I focused on Anna's averting eyes instead. "Sorry, darling." A thickly accented voice floated down the steps to lead way for Lady P, who was dressed to the part very well. Long, swishy skirt with large, chunky, adorned jewelry. I couldn't help but snicker. She frowned at me before casting her eyes down next to me. "Oh, no, dear. No children allowed. We don't want them to be spooked, do we?" "What children?" I stammered, following her eyes to the empty spot next to me. "You'll have to wait upstairs, darling. Run along like a good girl," Lady P cooed. I felt that familiar brush against my thighs and felt a jolt go through my body. "What children?" I repeated. My throat became suddenly dry. She raised her eyebrows at me. "Your daughter. Why do you deny her?" Anna laughed. "Kristen can barely keep a pot plant alive, Lady P." Lady P's look didn't even waver. There was no way this batshit crazy lady could have known. Even Anna didn't know. "I'm afraid, young lady, I cannot send her off, as the mother-daughter bond is much too strong. You are all she knows, so wherever you go, she will follow," she said in a softer tone, "until it is time for you to join her." I knew what she meant. I had my suspicions for a while now, but put them into my slowly going cray-cray category. Turned out, despite my best efforts to blur out the pain with a new drug-fueled life, I would always have a reminder of what used to be and what could have been.
Well, my little dreadfuls, what do you think? Abortion? Stillbirth? Murder, perhaps? Oh, the ties that bind. They truly are everlasting. Listening, or more accurately ignoring the oh-so-subtle signs around us is the theme of our next tale. Are you still listening? Listen.
Ugh, why can't I just stay here? I'm like 10 years old, Maya said. The fourth grader threw her head back into the headrest in semi-mock defiance. Her mother's eyes suddenly filled the rearview mirror. The angry lines at the corners convinced Maya to unclick her seatbelt. Mother and daughter walked side by side under the strip mall's billowing canopy. Across the promenade, a fat man with a terrible comb-over barked angrily at the cashier, spat and stormed off. Maya's mother leaned down and whispered, "That's why you can't stay in the car, because the world is full of crazy people, and you just never know." Maya nodded and let herself be led by the shoulder into the department store.
The little girl had hated the store for as long as she could remember. One time, she had gotten lost and wandered into a poorly lit storeroom filled with half-assembled mannequins. A security guard had heard her screams and eventually found her huddled under a desk. Maya shuddered at the memory and stared at a nightgown-clad dummy as she passed by. The plastic woman's hollow eyes stared back, zeroing in on the child's and locking firm. For a second, Maya panicked. Were the eyes following me? Maya stared a moment longer, then silently chided herself under her breath. Of course it wasn't watching. Only babies are afraid of stupid statues. A modest crowd sauntered through the store's wide, tiled aisles. Parents led their charges between the endless racks. Maya's mother stopped and pinched the fabric of a sweater. Maya did the same. A subtle scraping sound came from around a rack. Maya tilted her head and peeked. A child-sized mannequin with a hushing finger pressed to its lips and pointing an accusatory finger now stood next to Nightgown, whose gestures mirrored her words. Maya's stomach twisted. She poked her mother in the ribs, but failed to pull the woman's attention from the phone at her ear. Instead, Maya's mother gently pulled her finger by the wrist, deeper into the racks filled with colorful blouses. Deeper still they went until Maya no longer saw any other customers. Her little heart pounded in her chest. She peeked again as she walked. The mannequins hadn't moved. A large plastic hand suddenly jabbed her in the face. Maya fell backwards onto the ground and stared up over her quivering lips. A man-sized mannequin with the same hushing gesture loomed above. She screamed. A staccato of ear-splitting popping sounds peppered the air by the entrance. A chorus of screams followed. Maya recognized the sounds from her brother's video games. Gunshots? Maya pressed her cheek into her mother's thigh. She followed the strange postures of the plastic people frozen in their poses. Through her panic, she finally saw the mannequins were all pointing in the same direction. The side door. She squeezed her mother's trembling hand as a terrible realization swept through her young mind. They hadn't been trying to hurt her. They had been trying to warn her.
Why is it grown-ups never listen, never see what is right in front of them? Well, let's pretend our little girl was smart enough to drop the dead weight of her mother and run. Let's pretend this story didn't end quite so bloody, shall we? The night is growing long. The eyes blur, and for a moment, everyone looks the same. Thankfully, it does only last a moment. But for our little lady in this story, it's a permanent condition to see everyone as the same. And as it turns out, a condition that turns dreadfully deadly. Don't know you from Adam.
Don't Know You from Adam by EmpyRealInvective. Even with my condition, I considered myself to be an ordinary housewife. I ran errands, cooked, cleaned, and made sure everything ran smoothly. I'm a homemaker, and I have no problem with that. I led a run-of-the-mill life and actually preferred the comfort and predictability my life entailed. There was one thing about me that separated myself from other ordinary people. I have a rare condition called prosopagnosia that has left me unable to differentiate facial features. I feel like I have to explain this before I can continue with my story to let you know what it feels like to live with prosopagnosia. People don't call it face blindness without a reason. Imagine being unable to differentiate your significant other from a stranger at a glance. The only way I can identify someone is by their voice and mannerisms. To be honest, that method is not foolproof, and every now and then, I find myself talking to someone I don't know on the street or supermarket, mistaking them for a friend or family member. Of course, you don't need to comprehend what it's like to be in my shoes to understand why I can no longer stand the idea of interacting with another person. It all started a month ago, when I began getting little letters in the mail. They started off as innocuous messages tucked into blank envelopes. Thinking of you, you look beautiful today, your smile brightens up my day, and other notes like that. I thought it was my husband at first. He was always a bit shy. I personally think he dealt with low self-esteem his entire life, and is a bit hesitant to put himself out there. He was so nervous that when he asked for my hand in marriage, I almost had to finish his sentences for him so he could get the proposal out there. I figured that these little notes placed in the mailbox were his way of expressing his affections without putting himself out there. I waited for him to comment on the notes he was leaving me, but after a while it became apparent that he had nothing to do with them. I finally asked him about it, and he had no clue that I was even receiving messages. I was personally a little worried about it. Since there was no return address, that meant the mailman wasn't the one that was bringing them. I didn't like the idea that there was someone leaving me messages in my mailbox. The whole situation made me a little uneasy. My husband, Adam Dufresne, was fairly nonchalant about it all. He reasoned that it was probably some misguided teenager who was smitten with me. He explained that I had that effect on most people. I couldn't tell you if I'm pretty or not, but it was my husband's little affirmations that made me feel beautiful. For all his nervousness and shyness, sometimes he would say something that would sweep me right off my feet. He told me to just ignore the notes, and he would eventually get the message and take an interest in a girl his own age. I followed his advice and left the little white envelopes unopened in the mailbox. I pushed them to the back of the mailbox and collected the regular mail. I did that for a week or so, until I opened the mailbox one day to find it filled to the brim with little white envelopes. I was more annoyed than anything. I took them inside and began to throw them away. My curiosity got the better of me and I started to read a few. I don't know why, but if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that maybe I was a little lonely. Adam worked from 7 in the morning to 6 at night, and I had a few friends, but no one real close I could confide in. We were shopping friends, acquaintances that I knew from my errands. The problem was identifying them and striking up conversations. With my condition, made it hard to build friendships. The notes were all mostly innocent words like, "You're so nice," "I love what you've done with your hair," and other niceties that almost anyone could get away with saying in a conversation. It wasn't until I read, "Why don't you answer me?" that I became genuinely worried. A few days later, the messages started to get more sensual. Things like, "Your body is a shrine that I would love to worship. Your sun-kissed hair sets my heart aflame with desire. Nice tits." Not all of them were so poetic. It wasn't until I received one that praised the tattoo I had on my hip that I finally broke down and told my husband how bad the letters had gotten. I had a butterfly tattoo, I know, so cliché, on my lower hip. So low, in fact, that I had to be naked to see it. He finally agreed with me and we called the police that day. The police really couldn't do anything about our situation. The officer was even a little nonplussed as to why he had even been called. It wasn't until I told him about the note mentioning my well-hidden tattoo that he became invested. He confessed that they couldn't devote any police officers to stake out our house as they currently had their hands full with some group of idiots calling themselves the Pluto Gang that were running around performing acts of petty vandalism and a few instances of violence. He did confide that if we could manage to capture him on film so we could identify him, then we could get a restraining order filed against my stalker. The police officer left, and we began to formulate plans as to how we were going to record my love-struck stalker on video. We set up a laptop inside the house, facing the mailbox, and tried to use the camera to record him. The video was such bad quality that Adam couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman out there. I, of course, would be useless in identifying him on account of my prosopagnosia. The message he left was so vulgar that I tore it to pieces and washed them down the sink before my husband could read it. Adam had finally had enough. He decided that he had to threaten my admirer. I should have taken offense to him acting in such a primal manner, but a little part of me was glad that the usually so reserved Adam was expressing himself so forcefully. He decided that his best option was to lie in wait on the porch and catch my secret admirer when he arrived to leave another sordid message in my mailbox. Adam put his plan into effect the next night. I was concerned that Adam might get hurt, so I stayed up with him. I watched nervously from the window as he waited for my stalker to appear. Around 3 a.m, I spied someone emerging into the streetlights a few houses away. He approached our house warily. He appeared to be of average build. He gave furtive movements, afraid of being spotted. I can't describe him more than that. My husband waited until he opened the mailbox, and then he sprinted from his hiding spot on the porch towards him. He waved his baseball bat threateningly at the man, who took off. My husband gave chase, and the last I saw of them, they were vanishing in the darkness where the streetlights failed to provide illumination. My husband returned 15 minutes later, out of breath. It took a few minutes of looking at him before he realized the problem and puffed. "It's me, Olivia. I'm Adam Dufresne." He sucked down a few deep breaths before he huffed. He got away. I think I scared him off for good. He was sweaty, but that didn't stop me from wrapping my arms around him and holding him tightly. He had just risked his life for me. My stalker could have killed him. He stroked my hair and whispered, "I'd do anything to protect you." As I was wrapped in his warm, albeit moist embrace, I knew those words to be true. A few days passed without any notes in the mailbox, and life was beginning to return to normal. It was one morning when I was having a cup of coffee on my porch that it happened. I saw a man walking down the street. At first I thought it was just a man taking his dog out for a walk, but he stopped in front of my mailbox and slipped something inside before walking away with his dog. I waited 15 minutes before I could gather up the courage to approach the mail and retrieve the letter. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and read, "Your husband is so angry. You should leave him. I can treat you right. I can make you cook." I crushed the paper in my hands and went inside. Once inside, I wept. When Adam came home, I broke down and wept in his arms for an hour. He held me and waited for me to tell him what happened. He was furious. We had a big fight over it. I wanted to go to the police and try to get them involved, and he wanted to catch the man himself. In one of the more heated moments of the argument, he shouted, "You couldn't even pick him out of a lineup if you wanted to." I broke into a fresh set of tears and he apologized. Later that night, I went to bed alone while he waited on the porch for my stalker to come back. That happened for the next few days. I would go to bed, and my husband would stay up all night waiting for my stalker to appear on the porch. I could tell it was taking a toll on him. He moved around as if in a daze, and I knew that fatigue was getting to him. I started to worry that if he didn't drive off my stalker, my husband was going to go mad from sleep deprivation. I finally cracked and went to the police. The officer was understanding, but still couldn't do anything for our situation. It took me half the conversation to realize I was talking to the same officer who had made the house call. Sometimes it's hard to tell people in uniforms apart. I returned to the house to find my husband home early. I walked into the kitchen and saw Adam checking our voicemail. He had just deleted all the messages as I came in. When he saw me, he froze, as if startled by my appearance. I asked him, "Why are you home early?" There was a suspicious pause, as if he was not telling me the whole truth. Before he answered, "I was worried about you. I was worried what would happen if he had come back while I was gone." That night we made love for the first time since the letters started appearing. I don't want to get into too sordid details, but it was just so different that it stuck out in my mind. Usually our lovemaking is reserved, patient, and methodical. Hell, typically the lights are off and we're under the covers. It is satisfying. This time he was unrestrained. We made love passionately and with such urgency, as if it was the end of the world. I think it had something to do with the fact that we almost always had sex like clockwork. Every Saturday night we would make love. This was unplanned and filled with exigency. There was something bestial about Adam that night. I liked it. In the afterglow, he held me tightly and we drifted off like that. I woke that morning to find my husband still in bed. I looked at the clock. Shit, it was 10 o'clock on a Friday and Adam was late for work. I shook him awake and told him he was late. He told me that he had called in sick and wanted to spend the day with me. It was an odd thing for him to do, since I don't think I've ever seen him take a day off of work, unless he was physically unable to get into the office. It was a completely unexpected occurrence, but a welcome event nonetheless. Something was a little bit off about Adam. He was a bit more clingy than usual. He drifted around the house, almost always within a room's distance to me. He was more affectionate than usual. He nuzzled the nape of my neck. The feeling of his stubble prickling my skin was such an unknown sensation. He planted kisses and caught me up in a few embraces. He even playfully swatted my behind a few times. The shy and hesitant Adam was a thing of the past. I expected this behaviour to wane over the weekend, but it actually became more prevalent. He whispered sweet nothings in my ears, he massaged my shoulders, and even offered to rub my feet. I was enjoying some of the perks of this newly affectionate Adam, but some dark, sneaking suspicion was festering in the back of my mind. By the time Monday came around, I was almost excited to send him to work. I was beginning to feel claustrophobic with the amount of affection Adam was smothering me with. I practically had to force Adam out the door to work. He wanted to take another sick day to spend more time with me. To tell you the truth, I was a little exasperated. It is hard to run errands and keep the house clean with someone tagging along and sweetly crooning nothings in your ears and tracing your neckline with kisses every 15 minutes. He reluctantly left, and I went about with my day. I was glad when the mail arrived and there wasn't another plain white envelope with a sordid message inside. But still, there was that voice in the back of my head whispering that I was missing something from a larger picture. That night, I had a terrible lucid nightmare. I dreamt I was in our bed when my cell rang. I reached over Adam's sleeping-prone form, grabbed the cell, and answered it. The voice sent chills down my neck. The voice was angry and snarled. "Why didn't you pick me up from the airport? I had to get a cab home. Didn't you get my message that I would be gone all weekend on a work trip? Would you mind letting me in?" The sleeping man rolled over and faced me. I couldn't recognize his face due to my prosopagnosia, but I knew that whoever was in my bed was not my husband. The man who was sleeping next to me gave a deep laugh, and I saw that he was clutching a white envelope in his hands. He lunged towards me and I woke up with a scream in my throat. It took 15 minutes to convince Adam that it was all just a nightmare and nothing to be worried about. I didn't sleep at all the rest of the night. I had never had such an odd and frightening dream in my life. My husband showed some hesitation to leave for work, but once again I managed to convince him to leave. I hoped silently to myself that this wasn't going to become a daily occurrence for us. I continued with the slew of chores I had accumulated around the house. The mail arrived and I went out to retrieve it. There was no new envelope. I think my stalker had finally learned his lesson. I decided that we had to celebrate today. I decided that I would surprise Adam with a nice stir-fry for dinner tonight. I had a little garden in the back of the house where I could get some fresh vegetables. I donned my gardener's gloves and went out back to select some fresh vegetables to use for the stir-fry. I had some meat in the fridge that I could use to spice up the meal. It was Adam's favourite. It was there in the backyard, where I found the body, buried among the weeds and brush. I didn't see the corpse at first. Rather, I smelt an odd and nauseating odour in the air. At first I thought it was the compost we dumped in the garden, breaking down and decomposing. It wasn't until it became overwhelming, and I couldn't focus on picking vegetables, that I decided to follow it and track it down. I had assumed it was a dead deer or something, but when I trailed the scent to the brush on the edge of our yard, I instead found the corpse of a man. Looking back, I can't say what I did with 100% clarity, but I do remember gagging and almost getting sick. I was about to call the police and tell them about the corpse when a horrible thought forced its way into the forefront of my mind. How did he die? I managed a quick glance at the body and knew that he had been murdered because his skull was cracked open. It was then that all the horrible thoughts clicked into place. The body was a few days dead. He had suffered a violent death, my husband's recent surge in affection. The man that lied before me was my husband. Even with my prosopagnosia, I knew it was Adam Dufresne. I was startled out of this horrible revelation by his car pulling into the driveway. I bolted towards the house, hoping to reach the phone and call the police before he could get into the house. But as I entered, I found him waiting for me by the door. The man leaned forward and planted a kiss on my cheek before asking, "How was your day?" My skin crawled, but I tried to keep my composure. I would have to wait with this imposter, who was wearing my husband's clothes, driving his car and living his life. I had to wait until I could have enough time to call the police. I would have to play along with his sick game. I listened patiently to him tell me about his day, but the words were hollow and false. He was full of fallacies. His emotions were ersatz. He was a master manipulator who had killed and replaced my husband. It wasn't until he asked about what we were having for dinner that I was able to come to my senses and began to make the stir-fry. The situation got worse as time passed. Now I would have to make dinner with my stalker and bide my time until I could call the police. I cut up the vegetables and threw them in the skillet with some cooking oil. I let them soak up the oil for a bit before cranking up the heat. I was battling with the urge to throw up the entire time. This monster had murdered my husband, donned his clothes, and fooled me into thinking it was him. All the stolen kisses, the unwanted hugs, the unbidden sweet nothings he had whispered into my ear sent shivers up my spine and roiled my stomach. I thought about turning the knife on him and fending him off while I phoned the police, but I wasn't hopeful about making it out of the house alive if I tried that. He had already killed Adam. I needed to play house with this imposter, or I would find myself in the weeds and brush like my husband. My best bet was to continue with my stalker's sick fantasy of a happy relationship. My mind kept flashing back to the body in the backyard. I wanted nothing more than to cry. I stirred the vegetables and meat up. They hissed and spattered hot oil in the cast iron skillet. The meal was just about done, and the imposter was drawn to the stove by the smell. It wasn't until he wrapped his arms around me, cupping me and pressing himself against my body that I lost it. The images of him in my bed, making love to me, seared and hissed in my brain. The smell of his sweat and the feeling of his hot breath puffing against my neck. Like my imposter had lost control in the act of raping me, I lost control in the act of retaliating against him. I seized the cast iron skillet with my bare hand. There was a horrible hissing sound, but I didn't feel the pain. I whirled around and swung the skillet. It connected with the imposter's face and sent hot oil and stir-fry flying everywhere. He stumbled back and I closed the gap between us. He was double forward, clutching at his face and trying to come to terms with what was happening. I swung the skillet down and it made a sickening crack as it connected with his face. He dropped to the ground and writhed in pain, but I was not done with the imposter. I straddled my stalker as he tried to crawl away. I raised the blazing hot skillet above my head and brought it down on the back of his head a few more times. The last time, his head gave a sickening squelch as the skillet crashed down on him. He no longer moaned or moved. He was dead. The skillet slipped out of my hands and clanged on the tile. I became aware of the burning sensation in my hand. The skin of my palm was bubbling and molting. I got off the corpse and called the police. The police arrived 15 minutes later. They examined the body and began to question me in the front room, so the smell of burning flesh mixed with stir-fry didn't upset them. I told them the entire story, and when I mentioned the corpse in the backyard, the officer sent his rookie partner in the backyard while he continued to get my statement. I told them how my stalker had left increasingly disturbing messages in my mailbox and had probably murdered my husband while I was out. He then probably tried to hide the body before going inside and dressing himself in my husband's clothes. When I uncovered the body, I understood what had happened. The rookie returned and whispered something to the officer. This must have been his first time investigating a murder, because he whispered too loud to conceal the information. I didn't catch all the words he spoke to his partner, but I did overhear though. I overheard too much. I caught only a few words like unidentified, doesn't match, husband. The pieces clicked. Adam's words echoed in my head. I'd do anything to protect you. My mind raced. Would you kill for me, Adam? What would you do after realizing you murdered a man who was stalking and harassing your wife, and would probably be arrested? Would you flee? Or would you try to make the most out of your time with your wife before the inevitable end came? My mind spit out fragments of thoughts. The clingy attitude, the desire to spend all his time with me, the frantic love-making, the skillet connecting with a sickening squelch, the scalding oil splashing on my arms and his face. A haunting sound filled the house, and the officers looked startled. It took me a second to realize that the sound was coming from me. They took me into the station, wailing like a banshee. I'd do anything to protect you. Those words echo in my head. They are the first thing I hear when I wake up, and the last thing as I rest my head on the pillow. I'd do anything to protect you. I was acquitted due to my face blindness, which rendered me incapable of distinguishing the body in my backyard as that of my stalker, and not my husband. I'd do anything to protect you. My husband had murdered my stalker to protect me, and I had repaid him by smashing in his head with a skillet. I'd do anything to protect you. I reverted my name to Olivia Sachs and moved away, but the memories still haunt me. I wish they had arrested me. I wish they had locked me up with a life sentence. I wish I had died, but that's not in the cards for me. I'm now a recluse of sorts. I live alone, and I shun all forms of contact with people. You want to know why I can't stand the thought of interacting with another person? It is because I don't know them from Adam. It's always the same with every single person I see. They all remind me of him, and his words spoken on that late night. I'd do anything to protect you.
And that's the end of our moment together. My dreadful listeners, I hope you enjoyed this anthology of the fairer sex, and let me know if you want a volume 2. Now go show my fellow narrators, authors, and composers some support and love by clicking on their links below in the description, and sub to them all. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video and some of my other videos that you think deserve the views. Now remember, my little dreadfuls, don't be afraid of the dark. Be terrified of what is in it. Until next time.